The dust from the departing stagecoach hadn't even settled when the station master's words cut through Willa Nelson sharper than any knife. No refunds, no exceptions. No ticket means no ride. The 22-year-old actress stood abandoned at the remote Ordway station in Colorado Territory, 1875, her theatrical troupe continuing westward without her. But Mr. Grayson promised I could pay my share at the next stop. Willa protested, her voice cracking as she watched her livelihood, her fellow performers and all her possessions except the small carpet bag at her feet, disappear down the winding trail. The station master, a jowly man with permanent tobacco stains in his whiskers, merely shrugged. "That's between you and Grayson. Man's been known to make promises he don't intend to keep, especially to pretty young things looking for stage fame." He spat a stream of brown juice into the dust. "Reckon this ain't the first time he's left some hopeful songbird stranded when funds run dry." Willa's gloved hand gripped the handle of her carpet bag until her knuckles whitened beneath the fabric. 3 months with the magnificent Grayson players, traveling from St. Louis westward, and this was how it ended. One moment of honesty telling Mr. Grayson she'd spent her last dollars on medicine when fever had struck her a week earlier, and he'd ordered her off the stage at the next stop. "You're a liability," he'd muttered as the other actresses averted their eyes. "Can't afford to feed performers who don't pay their way." The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Willa surveyed the dusty street of Ordway. The settlement was little more than a watering stop along the stage route, a general store, the station house, a small hotel that looked far beyond her means, and a saloon from which piano music already drifted despite the early hour. Tears threatened, but Willa blinked them back. She'd cried enough during her childhood in the Philadelphia orphanage to know tears solved nothing. She'd need work and shelter before nightfall, a daunting prospect in a town where she knew no one. "Excuse me, miss." A deep voice startled her from behind. Willa turned to face a tall man silhouetted against the afternoon sun. When he stepped forward, she saw he wore a weather-beaten Stetson, a simple cotton shirt with a leather vest, and denim trousers tucked into well-worn boots. His face was tanned from endless days outdoors, with laugh lines crinkling around clear blue eyes that studied her with unexpected kindness. "Couldn't help overhearing," he said, removing his hat to reveal thick sandy hair. "Seems you've had a stroke of bad luck." "That's one way of putting it," Willa replied cautiously. Men's offers of assistance often came with unspoken expectations she had no intention of fulfilling. "Name's Wade Anderson," he continued, his voice carrying a gentle southern lilt. "I run cattle about 3 miles outside town." He gestured toward a wagon loaded with supplies. "Was about to head back to my place after picking up provisions." Willa remained silent, clutching her carpetbag tighter. Wade cleared his throat, seeming to sense her wariness. "My sister Martha keeps house for me. She's been wanting help with the cooking and sewing since my ranch hands increased to 5 this season." He shuffled his boots in the dust. "It's honest work with room and board if you need employment until the next stage comes through." Willa studied him closely. Despite his rough exterior, there was something reassuringly straightforward in his gaze. No leering, no suggestive undertones, just a practical offer made in broad daylight. "I don't know the first thing about ranch life," she admitted. "I've been on the stage since I was 16. A small smile quirked the corner of his mouth. "Martha can teach you what you need to know. My home is just down the road, and you'd be safer there than trying your luck in town with empty pockets." The station master, who'd been pretending not to listen, interrupted. "She'd be wise to take your offer, Anderson. Next stage ain't due for nearly 2 weeks, and Ordway ain't kind to women without means." Willa glanced toward the saloon, where several rough-looking men had gathered on the porch. Her options were desperately limited. "I'd be grateful for the position, Mr. Anderson," she said finally. "Though I should warn you, I've never cooked anything more complicated than toast." Wade's smile widened, transforming his weathered face. "Then you and Martha will get along just fine. She claims my appreciation for good food is the only reason she hasn't left me to fend for myself." He gestured toward his wagon. "May I?" When Willa nodded, he took her carpetbag and helped her onto the wooden seat with a gentlemanly touch that surprised her. As they pulled away from the station, she resisted the urge to look back. The stage life had never offered her security. Perhaps this unexpected detour would prove more fortunate than it seemed. The wagon creaked along the rutted trail, and Willa found herself studying her unexpected benefactor. Wade Anderson appeared to be in his early 30s, with strong, capable hands that held the reins with easy confidence. Unlike the theatrical men she'd known with their pomaded hair and affected mannerisms, he possessed an unvarnished authenticity that was oddly comforting. "You mentioned you were an actress," he said, breaking the silence. "Were you headed to Denver, San Francisco, eventually?" Willa replied. "Mr. Grayson promised performances all along the route. I joined the company in St. Louis after 2 years with a smaller troupe in Philadelphia." Wade nodded. "Must have seen a fair bit of the country then." "Mostly from stage-coach windows and behind theater curtains," she said with a rueful smile. "We rarely stayed anywhere long enough to truly see it." The trail curved around a rocky outcropping, revealing a sweeping vista of grassland stretching toward distant mountains. The landscape held a wild beauty that made Willa's breath catch, vast and untamed in a way eastern states could never match. "That's Signal Bluff," Wade said, noting her interest. "Some say the Arapaho used to light fires at the top to communicate with neighboring bands." He pointed to their right. "My property starts about a half-mile ahead, runs along Cottonwood Creek and up into those foothills." As they crested a small rise, Willa caught her first glimpse of the Anderson ranch, a sturdy 2-story house of weathered wood with a broad front porch, flanked by several outbuildings and corrals. A large barn stood nearby, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the rolling grassland. It wasn't grand by Eastern standards, but it spoke of solid prosperity built through hard work. "It's lovely," Willa said, genuinely impressed. Wade seemed pleased by her response. "Started with 20 acres and a 1-room cabin 12 years ago. Built most of it myself, with help from my hands as I could afford to hire them." As they approached, a woman emerged onto the porch, tall and angular, with her hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple dress covered by a large apron and shaded her eyes against the sun as she watched their approach. "That's Martha," Wade explained. "6 years my senior and never lets me forget it." Martha Anderson's expression was one of open curiosity as Wade brought the wagon to a halt. "Brought home a stray, I see," she called, though her tone held more amusement than censure. Wade jumped down from the wagon and helped Willa descend. "Martha, this is Miss Willa Nelson. She was traveling with a theater company that left her behind in Ordway. I've offered her a position helping you with the house until she decides her next move." Martha's shrewd eyes assessed Willa quickly. "Can you cook?" "Not particularly," Willa admitted. "So, basic mending, but nothing fancy." "Afraid of hard work?" Willa straightened. "No, madam." A slow smile spread across Martha's face. "Honest, at least. That's something." She gestured toward the house. "Come in, then. You look like you could use a meal and a proper wash. We'll sort out the details after you're settled." The interior of the Anderson home surprised Willa. Though clearly built by practical hands, there were unexpected touches of refinement: curtains at the windows, a collection of books on shelves in the parlor, and even a small piano in the corner. "It was our mother's," Martha explained, following Willa's gaze to the instrument. "Wade insisted on bringing it when we moved west after our parents passed. Says a home needs music, though neither of us plays worth a lick." "I play a little," Willa offered hesitantly. "Part of my theatrical training." Martha's eyebrows rose. "Well now, that's something useful after all." She led Willa toward a narrow staircase. "You'll have the small bedroom at the back. It's simple but clean. Wash basins there, and I'll bring up hot water shortly." Left alone in the tidy bedroom, Willa sat on the edge of the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to tremble. The events of the day, the humiliation of being abandoned, the terror of standing penniless in a strange town, and now this unexpected sanctuary overwhelmed her composed facade. A tear slipped down her cheek before she hastily wiped it away. She'd been fortunate, she reminded herself. Wade Anderson seemed decent, his sister practical but not unkind. This arrangement would give her time to consider her options, perhaps save enough for passage when the next stage came through. Yet as she unpacked her meager belongings, 2 spare dresses, undergarments, a small pot of face cream that had been a luxury purchase, and a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, Willa felt the weight of uncertainty. The stage had been her world since she'd fled the orphanage at 16, joining a traveling company that needed a girl who could sing and looked older than her years. What place could she possibly find in this rugged country, so far from everything familiar? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Martha entered with a steaming pitcher of water and a bundle of cloth. "Thought you might want a fresh apron," she said, laying the items on the washstand. "Dinner's in an hour. Nothing fancy, just beef stew and biscuits." She paused at the door. "Wade says you were with the Grayson players. They've a questionable reputation in these parts." Willa stiffened. "Mr. Grayson runs a legitimate theatrical company." Legitimate, perhaps, but they left 2 girls in similar straits in Pueblo last year. Martha's expression softened slightly. "You wouldn't be the first young woman Jeremiah Grayson has used and discarded when convenient." As Martha closed the door behind her, Willa sank back onto the bed. She'd heard whispers of course girls who mysteriously left the company between towns, roles reassigned without explanation. But the theater world was fickle, and she'd been grateful for steady employment. After washing away the dust of travel, Willa changed into her cleanest dress and pinned her dark honey-colored hair into a simple knot. The apron Martha had left was well-worn but spotlessly clean, and once tied around her waist, it transformed her appearance from stage performer to respectable household help. Downstairs, she found Martha efficiently setting the table while simultaneously checking the biscuits in the cast-iron stove. Through the window, Willa could see Wade in conversation with several men near the barn ranch hands, presumably, their figures backlit by the setting sun. "Can I help?" Willa asked, hovering uncertainly in the kitchen doorway. Martha glanced up, her expression appraising. "You can ring the dinner bell. It's time the men washed up." She nodded toward a brass bell hanging beside the back door. 3 good rings should bring them running. The bell's clear tone rang out across the yard, and Willa watched as the men immediately broke apart, heading toward a pump where they began washing hands and faces. Wade looked up at the sound, catching sight of her in the doorway. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, and Willa found herself returning the gesture before stepping back inside. Dinner was a simple but abundant affair. Besides Wade and Martha, there were 5 ranch hands, a grizzled older man introduced as Hank, who seemed to hold a position of authority among them. 2 brothers named James and Thomas Parker in their 20s, a quiet Mexican man called Miguel, and a freckle-faced youth named Davy who couldn't be more than 19. They treated Willa with a mixture of curiosity and awkward courtesy, clearly unused to a new face at the table. Wade had obviously informed them of her situation, as no one asked uncomfortable questions about her arrival. Instead, conversation centered on the day's work, cattle concerns, and preparations for an upcoming cattle drive to the railhead in 2 weeks' time. Miss Nelson was with a theater company, Wade mentioned during a lull in conversation. Perhaps she might favor us with a song sometime. Willa felt a flush rise to her cheeks as all eyes turned to her. I'm afraid my repertoire runs more to dramatic recitations than songs, Mr. Anderson. Nonsense, Martha interjected with unexpected enthusiasm. I saw the sheet music in your bag when I brought up the water. That's something we sorely lack out here, proper entertainment that doesn't involve cards or whiskey. The youngest hand, Davy, leaned forward eagerly. Could you sing something now, Miss Nelson? My ma used to sing evenings before she passed. Put on the spot, Willa hesitated, but the genuine interest in their faces so different from the raucous audiences she'd become accustomed to softened her reluctance. Perhaps after the dishes are cleared, she conceded. Later, seated at the small piano while the men arranged themselves awkwardly in the parlor, Willa felt a strange mix of nervousness and comfort. These weren't the boisterous crowds of miners or travelers she typically performed for, demanding bawdy songs and high kicks. The Anderson Ranch hand sat with the quiet anticipation of men starved for culture and refinement. Her fingers found the keys, a bit stiff from lack of regular tuning, but serviceable enough. She began with Beautiful Dreamer, a Foster song that had always been well received in more genteel establishments. As her clear soprano filled the room, Willa was acutely aware of Wade Anderson watching her from his position leaning against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, the silence held for a moment before Davy broke into enthusiastic applause, the others quickly following suit. Even Martha, standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, nodded approval. That was mighty fine, Miss Nelson, Hank said, voicing the sentiment shared by all. Brings back memories of proper theaters back east. Do you know Ora Lee? Miguel asked quietly, surprising Willa with his first direct address to her. She nodded and turned back to the piano, launching into the sweet, melancholy tune. By her third song, the men were joining in on choruses they knew, their rough voices blending surprisingly well with her trained one. It was a different kind of performance than she was accustomed to, intimate and genuine, without the artifice of stage makeup or elaborate costumes. When she finally begged tiredness and closed the piano, Wade approached as the others reluctantly dispersed to their quarters in the bunkhouse. You've made some friends tonight, he observed. I haven't seen the men so settled in months. Usually they're halfway to the saloon in Ordway by now, spending their wages on cards and trouble. Willa smiled, surprised by how much she had enjoyed the impromptu concert. They're a good audience, appreciative. Most folks out here are starved for beauty, Wade said, his voice softening. Music, poetry, things that feed the soul get sacrificed to the demands of survival. He gestured toward the bookshelves. That's why I keep Mother's books, though I rarely find time to read them anymore. For the first time, Willa noticed titles she recognized: Dickens, Shakespeare, even some Whitman and Longfellow. You've read these, everyone, some several times over. Winter evenings get long out here. His smile was self-deprecating. Surprises you, doesn't it? That a rough cattle rancher might appreciate literature. Perhaps I've been guilty of hasty judgments, Willa admitted. The theater world cultivates certain expectations about the audiences we encounter in Western territories. Wade laughed, a warm sound that transformed his face. No doubt most of those expectations are well-founded, But not everyone who came west left civilization entirely behind. He turned toward the staircase. "Rest well, Miss Nelson. Martha will show you your duties in the morning." As Willa climbed the stairs to her small room, exhaustion finally overtaking her, she found herself wondering about Wade Anderson, a man who built his own home with his hands but insisted on bringing his mother's piano and books into the wilderness. A man whose gruff exterior concealed unexpected depths. She fell asleep to the unfamiliar sounds of the Colorado night, distant coyotes, the occasional lowing of cattle, and the creaking of a house still new enough to settle with the cooling temperatures. It was not the clamor of city streets or the bustle of busy hotels she'd grown accustomed to, but there was something profoundly peaceful in its wildness. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the small window, and the scent of coffee and bacon drifting upstairs. Willa dressed quickly in her simplest dress and hurried down to find Martha already bustling about the kitchen. "Good, you're an early riser," the older woman said by way of greeting. "Men have been out since dawn. They'll be back for breakfast within the hour, hungry as bears after first chores." She gestured toward a bowl of dough. "You can shape those into biscuits while I tend the rest." Willa approached the task with determination if not skill, her city-bred hands awkward with the unfamiliar work. Martha observed her efforts with barely concealed amusement before finally intervening. "Like this," she demonstrated, her movements quick and practiced. "Don't work the dough too much or they'll be tough as saddle leather." By the time the men tramped in, stomping dust from their boots, Willa had produced a passable batch of biscuits and managed to set the table without breaking anything. She felt a small, unexpected surge of pride when Wade complimented the meal. "Miss Nelson helped with the biscuits," Martha informed him, ignoring Willa's embarrassed protest. "Hasn't poisoned us yet, which is more than I can say for my first attempts at cooking." After breakfast, Martha outlined Willa's responsibilities, helping with meals, laundry, cleaning the main house, and mending the seemingly endless supply of torn shirts and trousers generated by ranch work. It was hard, physical labor unlike anything Willa had experienced, but there was satisfaction in the tangible results of her efforts. Days settled into a pattern. Willa rose early, worked alongside Martha through the morning, prepared midday dinner when the men came in from the range, then tackled whatever household tasks remained in the afternoon. Evenings often ended with music, sometimes just quiet playing as the men relaxed after supper, sometimes with singing that grew more enthusiastic as they learned she wouldn't judge their untrained voices. Wade was frequently absent, riding out to check on distant parts of his property or handling business in town. But when present, Willa increasingly found his company engaging. Unlike the theatrical men she'd known full of exaggerated stories and empty flattery, Wade spoke straightforwardly about his life, the challenges of ranching in the territory, and his hopes for the future. A week after her arrival, Willa was hanging laundry in the yard when Wade rode in unexpectedly during the middle of the day. His expression was grim as he dismounted and approached her. "Everything all right?" she asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. "Had business in Ordway," he replied, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. "Thought you should know the Grayson players returned." Willa's hand stilled on the wet shirt she'd been hanging. "Returned? They're not due back through for months." Apparently they encountered trouble further west, something about permits denied in Denver. Wade studied her face carefully. "Grayson's asking after you. Seems he's had a change of heart about your value to the company." A complex tangle of emotions knotted in Willa's chest: vindication that Grayson regretted his hasty dismissal, wariness about his sudden interest, and an unexpected reluctance to contemplate leaving the ranch. "Did you speak with him?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Wade nodded. "Told him you'd found employment and weren't necessarily looking to rejoin his troupe." A muscle tightened in his jaw. "Man didn't take kindly to that. Implied certain things about your arrangement here that required significant restraint on my part not to answer with my fists." Heat rushed to Willa's face. Mr. Grayson has a talent for seeing the worst in any situation. "So I gathered." Wade replaced his hat. "Thought you should know they'll be in town 3 days before continuing on. If you wish to speak with him, I'd be happy to drive you in." "Thank you," Willa said, turning back to her laundry with hands that weren't quite steady. "I'll consider it." That evening, after the men had returned to the bunkhouse, Willa found herself alone on the front porch, watching darkness settle over the land. The possibility of returning to the stage stirred conflicting desires. The theater had been her salvation, once offering escape from the grim prospects facing an orphaned girl in Philadelphia, but Grayson's betrayal had revealed the precariousness of that life. The screen door creaked and Wade stepped out, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered one to Willa before settling into the chair beside her. "Martha says you've been quiet since I brought news from town," he observed, his voice gentle. Willa cupped the warm mug between her palms. "I'm trying to decide what I want." "And what might that be?" There was genuine interest in his question without pressure or expectation. "I've been on the stage since I was 16, she said after a thoughtful pause. "It's the only life I've known as an adult. Before that," she hesitated. "Before that was an orphanage in Philadelphia after my parents died in a fire. The theater was my escape." Wade remained silent, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "But it's a transient existence," she admitted. "New town every few days, never putting down roots. Always performing, rarely just being." Her gaze swept over the darkening landscape. "This past week has been the longest I've stayed anywhere in years." "And how do you find it, staying in one place?" Wade asked, his expression difficult to read in the gathering twilight. "Surprisingly appealing," Willa confessed. "There's something satisfying about seeing the results of your work: clean floors, mended clothes, even those misshapen biscuits I made yesterday." She smiled at the memory of Martha's patient corrections. On stage, the applause fades as soon as the curtain falls. Nothing tangible remains. Wade took a sip of his coffee. "Yet there's beauty in what you create there too. I saw it the other night when you performed for us. You brought something to this place that's been missing." The sincerity in his voice warmed her more than the coffee. "That's kind of you to say. Not kindness, just truth." He set his cup on the porch railing. "Whatever you decide about Grayson's offer, know that there's a place for you here if you want it. Martha's taken to you, and the men would likely stage a revolt if deprived of evening music now that they've grown accustomed to it." "And you, Mr. Anderson?" The question slipped out before Willa could reconsider its implications. "Would you miss the music too?" In the dim light, she saw something shift in his expression, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. "I believe I'd miss more than just the music, Miss Nelson." He stood, retrieving his cup. "But your future should be decided on your terms, not to please others. That's the benefit of freedom choice." With that, he bid her good night and returned inside, leaving Willa to contemplate choices she'd never expected to have. The next morning, Willa rose early and found Wade in the barn, checking tack before the day's work. "I'd like to go into town," she announced without preamble, "to speak with Mr. Grayson." Wade looked up from the saddle he was inspecting. "Of course. I can have the wagon ready in 20 minutes. The ride to Ordway was mostly silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Willa had dressed in her best remaining gown, a blue calico that had seen better days but still maintained some semblance of style. Her hair was neatly pinned, and she'd scrubbed her hands thoroughly, though they still showed evidence of household work they'd never done before. Ordway appeared much as it had the day she arrived, though with the added presence of the Grayson players' wagons parked near the hotel. Several members of the company lounged on the hotel porch, and Willa recognized Betsy Miller, the ingenue who had likely taken over Willa's roles. Heads turned as Wade brought the wagon to a stop, and whispers immediately followed. Willa straightened her shoulders and descended with dignity, Wade's supportive hand at her elbow. "Would you like me to accompany you?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "This is something I need to do alone." "I'll meet you at the general store afterward, if that's agreeable." Wade nodded, his eyes conveying concern but respect for her decision. "Take all the time you need." Willa approached the hotel with measured steps, ignoring the curious stares from her former colleagues. Inside, she found Jeremiah Grayson holding court in the small lobby, regaling the hotel proprietor with exaggerated tales of theatrical triumphs. "Miss Nelson," he exclaimed when he caught sight of her, his jovial tone at odds with the calculating look in his eyes. "What a delightful surprise." "We'd heard you'd found accommodation locally." "Mr. Grayson," Willa acknowledged coolly, "I understand you've been asking after me." Indeed. A terrible misunderstanding, your departure from our company." He waved the hotel proprietor away and lowered his voice. "Financial matters should never have come between us. Your contributions to our performances were invaluable. Valuable enough to abandon me without my belongings or means of support," Willa challenged, keeping her voice even. Grayson had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. "A regrettable incident, truly. Heat of the moment, you understand. But I've brought all your things, your costumes, personal effects, all waiting in our wagon." He leaned closer. "We leave tomorrow for Sacramento. The company needs you, my dear. Audiences have noted your absence." Willa regarded him steadily. The offer was precisely what she would have desperately wanted 2 weeks ago: reinstatement, recognition of her value, continuation of the only career she knew. Yet now it rang hollow. "And what guarantees would I have that the same misunderstanding wouldn't occur again at the next town?" she asked. Grayson's smile tightened. "I'm offering you your position back, my dear. Most would consider that generous after." He glanced toward the window where Wade could be seen talking with a shopkeeper across the street, after finding alternative arrangements so quickly. The insinuation in his tone made Willa's blood boil. "Mr. Anderson and his sister have been nothing but respectable employers and kind hosts during my unexpected stranding, unlike some I could name." "Come now," Grayson cajoled, shifting tactics. "You don't belong here, Willa, cooking and cleaning for ranch hands. Your talent deserves audiences, applause. You were born for the stage, not domestic drudgery." For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she foolish to consider abandoning the career she'd worked so hard to build? Yet as she looked through the window at Wade's solid, honest Wade who brought books to the wilderness and valued music in a harsh land, something clarified in her mind. "Thank you for retrieving my belongings, Mr. Grayson. I would appreciate having them returned." She met his gaze directly. "But I won't be rejoining the company." Grayson's facade of geniality evaporated. "Don't be absurd. What future do you possibly see here? Playing nursemaid to a cattle rancher in the middle of nowhere?" His voice hardened. "Or perhaps it's not the ranching that appeals, but the rancher himself. I wouldn't have taken you for one to sell yourself so cheaply." Willa's palm connected with his cheek before she'd even registered moving. The sharp crack drew startled glances from the hotel staff. "My arrangements are no concern of yours," she said, her voice low but fierce. "Please have my trunk delivered to the general store within the hour." "Good day, Mr. Grayson." She turned on her heel and walked out, heart pounding but steps steady. Outside, she paused to collect herself before crossing to the general store where Wade waited, examining a display of tools while clearly keeping an eye on the hotel entrance. He straightened when she approached. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she said, surprised to find it true. "Mr. Grayson will be sending over my belongings shortly. I've declined to rejoin the company." Something like relief flickered across Wade's features, quickly masked. "You're certain? I wouldn't want you to feel obligated to stay because of our arrangement." "I'm certain," Willa confirmed. "Though I hope our arrangement might continue. Martha mentioned needing help with preserving fruits for the winter, and I've barely mastered basic bread making." The smile that spread across Wade's face contained a warmth that made Willa's breath catch. "I reckon we can find a place for you as long as you'd like to stay, Miss Nelson." True to his word, or perhaps motivated by fear of further public confrontation, Grayson had Willa's trunk delivered to the general store within the hour. Wade loaded it carefully into the wagon, and they began the journey back to the ranch. As they left Ordway behind, Willa felt a sense of lightness. For the first time in years, she was moving towards something rather than away, choosing her path rather than following the only one available. "May I ask what changed your mind?" Wade inquired as they traveled. "About the theater, I mean." Willa considered the question thoughtfully. "I think perhaps I confused escape with purpose. The stage was my way out of a difficult situation, but I've been running so long I never stopped to consider what I might be running toward." She looked out at the landscape, unfurling around them wilder than anything she'd known, yet increasingly familiar. "Your sister said something my first day that stuck with me, about how Grayson has left other girls stranded before." Wade's grip on the reins tightened. "It's a common enough story out here. Men like Grayson prey on young women with few options." "I was lucky," Willa acknowledged. "That you happened to be there, that you offered honest work instead of." She let the sentence trail off. "Not luck," Wade corrected gently. "I was there because Martha had sent me to meet the stage. She'd read about the Grayson players coming through and wanted me to inquire about tickets for their performance." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "She has a fondness for Shakespeare, my practical sister." The realization that their meeting hadn't been entirely chance added another layer to Willa's growing conviction that she'd made the right choice. As the Anderson ranch came into view, she was struck by how much it already felt like returning home rather than arriving at a temporary shelter. Martha greeted them from the porch, eyebrows rising at the sight of Willa's trunk in the wagon. "Made your decision, then?" she asked as Willa approached. "If you'll still have me," Willa confirmed. Martha's usually stern expression softened. "Been nice having another woman about the place. And someone who can carry a tune, unlike my brother who sounds like a wounded calf when he tries to sing." Wade's indignant, "I heard that," from where he was unloading the trunk made both women laugh, breaking any remaining tension. That evening, after dinner had been cleared and the dishes washed, Willa opened her trunk for the first time since being stranded. Among the costumes and stage makeup, she found treasured mementos, a daguerreotype of her parents, letters from friends in other companies, programs from performances she'd been particularly proud of. But it was a different object that brought tears to her eyes, a small leather-bound volume of poetry she'd believed lost. It had been her mother's, one of the few possessions Willa had managed to save from the fire that took her parents. Holding it now felt like reconnecting with a part of herself she'd set aside in the constant movement of theatrical life. A knock at her door interrupted her reminiscence. Martha stood there, arms folded. Wade mentioned you play piano proper, not just picking out tunes, she said without preamble. That right, Willa nodded. I had lessons as a child before the orphanage, and later some coaching for theatrical performances. Good. The church in Ordway needs someone who can play hymn Sundays. Minister's wife did it, but she's increasing and sick most mornings now. Martha's expression remained practical, but there was kindness in her eyes. Thought you might like to know there's call for your talents beyond our evening sing-alongs. The offer represented something Willa hadn't expected: integration into the wider community, recognition of her skills beyond entertainment. I'd be happy to help if transportation could be arranged. Wade drives in Sundays anyway, Martha replied with a dismissive wave. Says a man needs reminding of his faith at least once a week, else the rest don't matter much. She turned to leave, then paused. Glad you're staying, girl. Place feels more alive with you in it. Coming from Martha, the simple statement held tremendous weight. As the woman disappeared down the hall, Willa closed her trunk with a sense of putting the past in its proper place, not forgotten, but no longer defining all she could be. The following weeks brought new rhythms to Willa's life. Sunday mornings now included accompanying Wade to the small church in Ordway, where her piano playing earned appreciative nods from the congregation. Several ranchers' wives approached her after services, extending invitations to social gatherings that hinted at acceptance into the community. On the ranch, her relationship with the Hands evolved from polite distance to comfortable camaraderie. She learned their stories: Hank's 3 decades working cattle across 4 territories, the Parker brothers' dreams of saving enough to start their own small spread someday, Miguel's family waiting in a village just across the Mexican border, receiving most of his wages each month, young Davy's determination to prove himself worthy of responsibility beyond the most menial tasks. And then there was Wade, increasingly the center of Willa's thoughts, though she tried to maintain proper distance. He treated her with unfailing respect, neither as servant nor delicate flower, but as a person of value and substance. Their conversations over evening coffee on the porch became a cherished ritual, ranging from literature to ranching concerns to childhood memories. 2 months after her arrival, Wade announced at breakfast that he'd be taking 3 of the Hands to escort a small herd to the railroad at Denver, a journey expected to last 10 days. Will you be all right with just Miguel and Davy here to help? He asked Martha, though his eyes flickered briefly to Willa. Been managing this ranch since before you had whiskers, Martha retorted. We'll be fine. More concerned about you lot remembering to eat something besides beans and jerky. The morning of their departure brought an unexpected tension. Willa found herself lingering as Wade made final preparations, checking supplies in the chuck wagon and giving instructions to Miguel about property matters in his absence. You'll be careful, she asked when he finally approached to say goodbye, immediately feeling foolish for the question. Wade's expression softened. Always trails well established, and we're only taking 30 head to supplement a larger shipment. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. Brought you something. From Denver, last time I went. He pressed a small package wrapped in brown paper into her hand. Inside, Willa found a slender volume of Tennyson's poems, its binding new but not ostentatious. Noticed you reading your mother's poetry book, Wade explained, a touch of color rising in his tanned cheeks. Thought you might enjoy something different. The thoughtfulness of the gift, chosen specifically for her interests, purchased weeks ago, left Willa momentarily speechless. It's perfect, she managed finally. Thank you. Their eyes held for a moment too long before Martha's voice broke the spell, calling for Wade to get moving if they wanted to make their intended campsite by nightfall. With a tip of his hat and one last smile, Wade mounted his horse and led his small procession away from the ranch. Willa watched until they disappeared beyond the ridge, the book clutched to her chest. "He's sweet on you, you know," Martha said matter-of-factly, appearing at Willa's elbow. Willa felt heat rise to her face. "He's been kind to both of us," Martha snorted. Been his sister long enough to know the difference between Wade being decent and Wade being smitten. Never seen him so concerned with literature before you arrived. She turned toward the house. "Come on then. Plenty of work needs doing, whether he's here making calf eyes at you or not." The days of Wade's absence dragged surprisingly slowly. Willa filled them with work helping Miguel mend fences in the nearest pasture, teaching Davy to read better using Wade's books as practice material, and assisting Martha with a thorough cleaning of the house. Evenings she spent reading her new Tennyson volume on the porch, sometimes aloud to Martha, who claimed indifference to fancy poetry, yet never suggested stopping. On the fifth evening, a storm rolled in from the mountains with alarming speed. Willa and Martha hurried to secure windows and doors as wind lashed the house and lightning split the sky. "Worried about the men?" Martha asked as they sat by lamplight in the kitchen, the worst of the gale howling outside. Willa nodded, unable to deny her concern. "Will they have shelter on the trail? Wade knows every cave and overhang between here and Denver," Martha assured her. "Been caught in worse and made it through." She studied Willa's anxious expression. "You care for him quite a bit, don't you?" The directness of the question might have flustered Willa once, but 2 months in Martha's company had accustomed her to the woman's forthright nature. "Yes," she admitted simply. "More than I expected to." Martha nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Good. About time he found someone with sense and backbone. Too many silly girls in town batting their eyelashes but fainting at the first mention of actual ranch work." "I haven't said anything to him," Willa protested. "And he's my employer. It wouldn't be proper." Martha's laugh held genuine amusement. "Proper? Girl, this is Colorado territory, not Philadelphia society. Out here, folks make their own rules about what's fitting." Her expression grew more serious. "My brother's a good man better than most. Been alone too long because he puts everyone else's needs before his own." "He speaks very highly of you," Willa observed. "We've looked after each other since our parents died," Martha acknowledged. "But I'm getting older and this place needs more than just the two of us to keep it thriving." She fixed Willa with a pointed look. "Needs children running about someday, carrying on what he's built." Willa felt her cheeks flame at the implication, but before she could respond, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Both women rushed to the front of the house to find a large tree branch had crashed through the parlor window, rain and debris pouring in through the broken glass. "Damnation," Martha muttered, already moving to assess the damage. "Miguel, Davy." She called toward the bunkhouse, knowing the men would check on them during the storm. The next hours passed in controlled chaos, securing a tarp over the broken window, sweeping up glass, and moving furniture away from the water damage. By the time they'd done all they could, it was well past midnight and all 4 of them were exhausted. "Nothing more to be done until daylight," Martha declared. "Best get some rest." Sleep eluded Willa, however. Her mind alternated between concerns about the storm damage and worries for Wade and the others on the trail. The intimacy of her conversation with Martha before the interruption had stirred emotions she'd been trying to keep properly contained. Did she truly care for Wade as more than her benefactor and employer? The answer was undeniably yes. Somewhere between music-filled evenings and quiet conversations, between learning to bake bread under Martha's tutelage and watching Wade gentle a nervous colt, Willa had developed feelings deeper than gratitude or friendship. But what did he feel? He'd been unfailingly kind, certainly, and there had been moments looks held too long, a brush of hands when passing dishes at dinner, the thoughtful gift of poetry that suggested his interest might extend beyond mere courtesy. Yet he'd made no declaration, no clear indication of romantic intentions. The storm eventually subsided, leaving behind a washed, clean world glittering in the morning sunlight. Willa rose early to help assess the damage, which proved less severe than feared. The broken window was the worst of it, along with some water damage to the parlor floor and a portion of rug that would need thorough drying. Miguel rode into Ordway to arrange for glass replacement, while Willa and Martha tackled the cleaning. By afternoon, the parlor was in reasonable order again, though the temporary tarp covering the window gave the room a makeshift appearance. "Could have been much worse," Martha pronounced, surveying their work. "Remember the tornado of '69? Took half the barn roof and scattered it across 3 counties. The following days passed in a blur of regular chores and storm repairs. On the morning Wade was expected to return, Willa found herself taking unusual care with her appearance, pinning her hair more carefully, choosing her newest apron, even adding a touch of rose water she'd been saving for special occasions. Martha noticed but mercifully limited her commentary to a knowing smile. By mid-afternoon, there was still no sign of the returning party. Martha attempted to distract Willa with bread-making lessons, but both women found themselves frequently glancing toward the road. "Probably camped an extra night after the storm," Martha reasoned. "Wade's cautious with his men's safety." Evening came with no arrival, and Willa's anxiety grew despite Martha's reassurances. She found herself unable to concentrate on her book, instead pacing the repaired parlor while Martha knitted by lamplight. "You'll wear a path in my clean floor," Martha observed. "Sit down, girl. Worrying changes nothing." Before Willa could respond, Davy burst through the door, breathless from running. "Riders coming, 6 of them, not 4. Both women hurried onto the porch. In the fading light, they could make out a group approaching Wade and his men, but with 2 additional figures whose details were obscured by distance and dusk. As they drew nearer, Willa could see that one of the extras rode double with Hank, appearing to be injured. The other rode his own mount, hands bound to the saddle horn. "Trouble," Martha murmured, already moving back inside. "Get water boiling and find the medical supplies in the pantry cabinet." By the time Wade and his party reached the house, Martha and Willa were prepared. Wade dismounted wearily, his face showing exhaustion beyond normal travel fatigue. "Ran into a situation," he explained tersely. "James took a bullet in the shoulder. Nothing vital hit, but it needs proper cleaning." As the hands helped James into the house, Wade gestured toward the bound man still on horseback. "This one's responsible. Tried to rob our payroll from the cattle sale. Thomas caught him tracking us from Denver." The man, unshaven, hard-eyed, and sullenly defiant, spat into the dust. "Wouldn't have been necessary if you just handed over the money when asked." "Shut your mouth," Wade ordered sharply. "You're lucky we didn't leave you for the vultures after you shot one of my men." Willa watched the exchange with wide eyes, suddenly confronted with the harsher realities of frontier life. Wade caught her gaze and his expression softened marginally. "Sorry to bring this trouble home," he said quietly. "Need to keep him secured tonight. Sheriff Peters from Ordway will come collect him tomorrow." "What do you need me to do?" Willa asked, finding practical purpose easier than processing her emotions. "Help Martha with James if you would, then perhaps some food for the men." His hand briefly touched her arm. "We're all right." just tired and hungry. While Martha treated James's wound in the kitchen, Willa prepared a simple meal from the supplies available. The would-be robber was secured in the barn under Thomas's watchful eye, while the rest of the men took turns washing up and changing into clean clothes. Wade joined Willa in the kitchen as she worked, his presence both comforting and suddenly charged with awareness after days apart. "Your window's been replaced," he noted, nodding toward the parlor. "The storm broke it," Willa explained. "Tree branch. We managed well enough until Miguel could arrange repairs." Wade studied her for a moment. "You look different somehow." Willa's hands stilled on the bread she was slicing. "Different, more settled, as if you belong here." His gaze was warm. "It suits you." Before she could respond, Martha emerged from treating James's wound, breaking the moment. "He'll do. Bullet went clean through, no bone damage. Needs rest and watching for fever." The evening passed with subdued conversation as the men recounted their journey, the successful sale of the cattle, and the unfortunate encounter with the robber on their return. Wade had recognized the man as someone who'd been hanging around the stockyards during their transaction, obviously noting the substantial payment they'd received. "Followed us for a day before making his move," Hank explained. "Amateur work, really. A professional would have waited till we were sleeping." "Still dangerous enough to put a bullet in James," Wade countered grimly. Later, when the hands had returned to the bunkhouse except Thomas, who insisted on taking first watch over their prisoner, and Martha had retired for the night, Willa found herself alone with Wade on the porch. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the vastness above, so different from the obscured city skies of her previous life. "I was worried," she admitted into the comfortable silence between them, "during the storm, and when you were late returning." Wade's profile was thoughtful in the dim light spilling from the window. "Been a long while since anyone worried particularly about my comings and goings." He turned to face her. "Can't say I mind it, though." Something in his voice gave Willa courage. "I've been reading the Tennyson." "Thank you again. It was a perfect gift. Glad you liked it. Spent longer than I'd care to admit choosing between that and Wordsworth at the Denver bookshop." His smile held a touch of self-deprecation. "Shopkeeper probably thought me quite mad, deliberating over poetry as if it were a matter of life and death." The image Wade Anderson, cattle rancher, earnestly perusing poetry collections to find one she might enjoy warmed Willa's heart. "What made you decide on Tennyson?" "Crossing the Bar," he answered promptly. "Read it standing there in the shop and thought it captured something important about journeys and destinations." His gaze held hers. "Seemed fitting." Willa recalled the poem Tennyson's meditation on death as a peaceful crossing to meet one's pilot face to face. "It's about the final journey," she said softly, puzzled by his choice. "Perhaps," Wade acknowledged. "Or perhaps about any passage from one life to another, one way of being to something new." His voice lowered. About faith in the crossing and what waits beyond. The depth of his interpretation surprised her. "You've thought about this. Had plenty of time on the trail." He shifted slightly closer. "Willa, I know you came here through circumstance, not choice, that your life was heading elsewhere before Grayson left you stranded, but these past months—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "These past months have been unexpected gifts," Willa finished for him, her heart racing. "I came here thinking only of survival until the next stage arrived. I never imagined finding a place that might become home." "Is that what this has become to you?" Wade asked, his voice gentle but intent. "A home. It's becoming one," she admitted. "More than anywhere since I lost my parents." In the silvery moonlight, Wade's expression was both tender and resolute. Then there's something I should say, though I fear it's too soon and might seem improper given our arrangement." Willa felt a flutter of anticipation. Martha assures me that propriety in Colorado territory is somewhat more flexible than in Philadelphia society. A surprised laugh escaped him. "Has my sister been giving you advice about me?" "Perhaps a little," Willa acknowledged with a smile. "She seems to think you've been alone too long." Wade's amusement faded into something more serious. "She's right, I have been." He took Willa's hand, his touch warm and steady. "I never expected to find someone like you here, Willa Nelson. Someone who brings music and poetry and unexpected joy to a place I thought complete without them." His words resonated so perfectly with her own feelings that Willa felt momentarily speechless. When she found her voice again, it held a certainty that surprised even her. "I never expected to find a place where I belonged, rather than just somewhere I was passing through, or someone who would see me as more than just what I could perform on a stage." Wade's hand tightened on hers. "I see all of you, Willa. The performer, yes, but also the woman who faced abandonment with dignity, who adapted to ranch life without complaint, who reads poetry on the porch and plays hymns at church, and somehow makes this house feel more like home than it has in years." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. Wade, his free hand gently touched her cheek. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "Have been since that first night you played Mother's piano and brought this house back to life, and if you'll allow it, I'd like to court you properly. Not as employer and employee, but as a man who sees his future differently now than he did before you arrived." Tears pricked at Willa's eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition of having found, at last, not just shelter but belonging. "I would like that very much," she whispered. In the silver moonlight, with the vast Colorado sky stretching above them, Wade Anderson bent to place a gentle kiss on Willa Nelson's lips, a promise of beginnings rather than endings, of journeys undertaken together rather than alone. The morning brought a flurry of activity with the arrival of Sheriff Peters from Ordway to collect the prisoner. The man remained sullen and uncooperative as he was transferred to the sheriff's custody, spitting threats that the lawman dismissed with practiced indifference. "Won't be seeing him for a good long while," Peters assured Wade. "Judge Wilson doesn't take kindly to road agents, especially ones who shoot honest workers." As the sheriff departed with his prisoner, life at the Anderson ranch began returning to normal. James was installed in the bunkhouse with strict orders to rest his injured shoulder. The other hands resumed their regular duties, and Wade turned his attention to tasks neglected during his absence. For Willa, however, everything had subtly shifted. Wade's declaration and their kiss had transformed her perception of the ranch from temporary haven to potential future. Their interactions now carried new awareness, glances held longer, casual touches lingering, conversations deepening beyond practicalities. Martha observed these developments with unconcealed satisfaction. "About time," she muttered when she caught Wade holding Willa's hand as they sat on the porch after dinner. "Was beginning to think I'd need to lock you both in the root cellar to get any results." Wade laughed, unembarrassed by his sister's teasing. "Always said you lacked patience, Martha, and you've had too much of it," she retorted. 29 years old and only now getting around to proper courting." In the days that followed, Willa discovered new dimensions to Wade beyond the capable rancher she'd first known. He showed her his favorite places on the property, a high ridge overlooking the valley where he sometimes rode to think, a tranquil bend in Cottonwood Creek where trout gathered in the deeper pools, a stand of aspen trees whose leaves turned to gold each autumn. "My father brought us west when I was 17, he explained as they picnicked beside the creek one Sunday afternoon. had a dream of building something that would last beyond his lifetime, something worth passing down. "He would be proud of what you've accomplished," Willa observed, watching the play of emotions across Wade's face. He saw the beginnings of it. "We lost him to pneumonia our third winter here." Wade's expression grew distant with memory. "Mother followed 2 years later. Said she couldn't bear another winter without him, and somehow her body made that true." Willa's heart ached for the young Wade and Martha, left to build their parents' dream alone in a harsh land. "That's why the books and piano matter so much to you, their connections to them." Wade nodded. "Mother believed civilization wasn't just about buildings and laws, but about preserving beauty and knowledge even in difficult places." He smiled softly. "She would have adored you, I think." As autumn progressed, the rhythm of ranch life adapted to the changing season. Cattle were moved to lower pastures in anticipation of winter snows. Preserves were put up, firewood stockpiled, repairs made to buildings and equipment. Through it all, Willa found herself increasingly integral to the workings of the ranch, not just in household tasks, but in planning and decision-making. "What do you think about expanding the vegetative garden next spring?" Wade asked one evening as they reviewed supplies. "Martha mentioned you've had some ideas." Willa nodded, surprised and pleased he'd remembered her casual comments. "The southern slope near the springhouse gets excellent sun. With proper preparation this fall, we could double the growing space." Wade repeated, his eyes warm on hers. "I like how that sounds." October brought the Harvest Social in Ordway, an annual event that drew ranchers and townspeople alike for a day of feasting, music, and dancing. As Wade drove Willa and Martha into town in the freshly painted wagon, Willa felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "This will be your first proper introduction to the wider community," Martha explained, smoothing her best dress. "Harvest socials when folks take measure of newcomers." "Don't listen to her," Wade countered with a grin. "It's just an excuse for people who work too hard to enjoy themselves for a day. Nothing formal about it." The town square had been transformed with tables laden with food, bunting hanging from buildings, and a wooden platform constructed for musicians and dancing. As they arrived, several people immediately approached to greet them, eyes curious as they were introduced to Willa. "So you're the piano player we've been hearing about," Mrs. Hollister, the minister's wife, said warmly. "Reverend says the congregation's singing has improved tremendously since you've been accompanying." Throughout the afternoon, Willa found herself welcomed into conversation after conversation. The initial curiosity about Wade Anderson's city girl gradually gave way to genuine interest in her as a person. She shared recipes with ranchers' wives, discussed books with the schoolteacher, and promised piano lessons to several hopeful parents with children. When the dancing began, Wade led her onto the platform without hesitation. "Fair warning," he murmured as they took position for a Virginia reel. "I'm better with cattle than dancing." Despite his disclaimer, he moved with natural grace, guiding her through the patterns with sure hands and infectious enjoyment. As they whirled through the figures, Willa caught glimpses of approving nods and smiling faces from the onlookers. Later, during a quieter waltz, Wade held her closer than propriety strictly allowed. "Everyone's watching us," Willa whispered, though she made no move to increase the distance between them. "Let them," he replied simply. "I'm proud to be seen with you." As the music slowed, Wade's expression grew serious. "Willa, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." He guided her toward the edge of the platform, away from the center of activity. Willa's heart quickened at his tone. "Yes." Before he could continue, a commotion near the refreshment tables interrupted the moment. Voices were raised in argument, followed by the unmistakable sound of a punch landed, Wade sighed. Timing never was my strong suit. He squeezed her hand. Wait here. I should help sort this out. He moved quickly to join several other men already separating the combatants, two young ranchers whose dispute appeared fueled more by whiskey than genuine grievance. Willa watched as Wade spoke calmly to one of them, his presence alone seeming to diffuse some of the tension. He's good at that, Martha observed, appearing at Willa's side. Settling trouble without adding to it, part of why folks respect him around here. What was he like as a young man? Willa asked, curious about the Wade before she knew him. Martha considered the question. Serious. Responsible beyond his years after father died. Took on running the ranch at 20, kept us afloat during lean years when others failed. Her expression softened with memory. But there was joy in him too. Music, books, appreciation for beauty, those came from mother. The strength and determination from father. And now, Willa prompted, Martha's shrewd gaze assessed her. Now I see something in him I feared might never return after we lost them. Hope, not just for surviving, but for building something beyond cattle and land. She nodded toward where Wade was still mediating the dispute. That's your doing, girl. Before Willa could respond, Wade returned, shaking his head ruefully. Henderson boys arguing over whose turn it is to court Sally Miller. As if the girl hasn't made it plain she's not interested in either of them. The moment for whatever question he'd intended to ask had passed, but his hand found Willa's again, warm and reassuring. As autumn deepened toward winter, life at the ranch took on a cozier aspect. Evenings were spent gathered around the fire in the parlor, Wade often reading aloud, while Martha knitted and Willa mended or simply listened. On occasion, the hands would join them for music and storytelling, particularly as the first snows limited outdoor activities. It was during one such evening in late November that Wade finally returned to the question interrupted at the harvest social. The hands had retired early, and Martha had tactfully excused herself to bed despite the relatively early hour. Subtle as a stampeding buffalo, my sister, Wade commented as Martha's footsteps receded upstairs. Willa smiled. She means well. That she does. Wade set aside the book he'd been reading and moved to sit beside Willa on the small sofa. Makes what I want to ask somewhat easier, though. Willa's heartbeat quickened as Wade took her hands in his. The firelight cast his features in warm, flickering illumination, highlighting the earnest intensity in his gaze. When you came here, it was circumstance, not choice, he began. And I've tried to be mindful of that to give you time to know your own mind without pressure or obligation. Wade, Willa started, but he gently shook his head. Please, let me finish while I've found my courage. He took a deep breath. These past months have shown me what was missing in my life, not just companionship, but partnership. Someone to share not just work and responsibility, but dreams and possibilities. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. I love you, Willa Nelson. Not as the actress I first met, not as the helper Martha needed, but as the remarkable woman you are. Tears welled in Willa's eyes, but she remained silent, sensing he had more to say. I'm asking if you might consider making this arrangement permanent. His voice softened. If you might consider becoming my wife. Not right away if that feels too soon, but when you're ready. He smiled self-deprecatingly. I know a cattle ranch in Colorado Territory isn't the future you imagined for yourself, but Willa pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping his words. It's better than anything I imagined, she said fervently, because it's real, Wade, not painted backdrops and pretended emotions, but solid ground and true feelings. Hope blazed in his eyes. Is that a yes? It's a yes, Willa confirmed, her heart overflowing. Yes, I will marry you, Wade Anderson. His smile was radiant as he cupped her face gently between his hands. "You've made me the happiest man in Colorado." Then he kissed her, no longer the hesitant first kiss of courtship, but the confident, tender kiss of a future promised and accepted. From the doorway came a poorly disguised sniff. They broke apart to find Martha standing there, pretending to look for something she'd forgotten. "Don't mind me," she said, hastily wiping at suspiciously damp eyes. "Just needed my—" "Oh, never mind, carry on." She disappeared back toward the stairs, but not before calling over her shoulder. "About time, I say. Spring wedding would be practical. Ground's too frozen now for proper celebrating." Wade laughed, resting his forehead against Willa's. "Apparently our timeline has been decided for us." "Spring sounds perfect," Willa agreed, her hands resting on his shoulders. "And Martha's right about time indeed." The months leading to their spring wedding passed in a flurry of preparation and anticipation. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the community, bringing congratulatory visitors and gifts, jars of preserves, hand-stitched linens, a beautifully crafted rocking chair from the town's carpenter. Christmas brought special joy as Wade presented Willa with an engagement ring, his mother's band of gold with small diamonds arranged in a flower pattern. "She told me to save it for someone who would bring music back to our home," he explained as he slipped it onto Willa's finger. "As if she somehow knew you'd come along one day." In January, an unexpected letter arrived from Philadelphia, a response to one Willa had sent to the orphanage where she'd spent her childhood, seeking information about any distant relatives who might wish to attend her wedding. Though the matron regretfully reported no family connections remained, she did share surprising news of a small trust fund established by Willa's parents before their deaths. "It wasn't much," Willa explained to Wade and Martha as she read the letter aloud. "But the trustees invested it conservatively and with no one claiming it for years." She looked up, eyes wide. "There's nearly $800. "That's a substantial sum," Wade said, clearly surprised. Willa's mind raced with possibilities. "We could expand the house as you've talked about, or increase the herd. Or, it's your money," Wade interrupted gently. "From your family. You should use it as you see fit." After careful consideration, Willa proposed a plan that delighted both Wade and Martha, using part of the funds to add a proper music room to the house, with space for the piano and Wade's growing collection of books, while setting aside the remainder for future needs. "A place for beauty and knowledge," she explained, echoing Wade's description of his mother's values. "For us and for the children we might have someday." The construction began in February during a mild spell, with Wade and the hands doing most of the work themselves. By April, as their wedding approached, the addition stood complete, a bright, airy space with large windows that flooded it with natural light. The wedding itself took place on the first Saturday in May, with wildflowers carpeting the ranch's meadows and new leaves unfurling on the cottonwoods. Reverend Hollister conducted the ceremony on the ranch's front porch, decorated with ribbons and flower garlands crafted by the women of Ordway. Willa wore a dress of cream-colored silk ordered from Denver, elegant, but practical enough for frontier life. Martha had surprised her with a crown of spring blossoms, and her mother's pearl earrings, something borrowed and something old in one, she'd explained gruffly, blinking back uncharacteristic tears. The entire community turned out for the celebration, tables groaning with potluck contributions, music provided by local fiddlers supplemented by Willa at the newly relocated piano, dancing continuing well into the evening. Even Sheriff Peters attended, bringing news that the man who'd shot James had been sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. As twilight settled over the land, Wade led Willa away from the festivities to the ridge overlooking the valley, the special place he'd shown her months before. "Happy, Mrs. Anderson?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched the first stars appear. "Completely," Willa answered, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Though I'm still getting used to the name." "It suits you," he murmured, dropping a kiss on her neck. "Like you were always meant to have it." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, absorbing the beauty of the moment and the promise of their future together. "You ever think about what might have happened if the Grayson players hadn't left you behind?" Wade asked eventually. "If our paths had never crossed?" Willa turned in his arms to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes. I might have continued on to San Francisco, performed in grander theaters perhaps, but I would have kept moving, always searching for something without knowing what it was." She touched his face tenderly. "I needed to be stranded to find where I truly belonged." Wade caught her hand and kissed her palm. "Then I'm grateful for Jeremiah Grayson's poor judgment just this once." "As am I," Willa agreed with a smile. "Though I prefer to think of it as fate rather than misfortune. My journey was always meant to bring me here to you, to this land, to this life we're building." As the stars multiplied overhead and distant music from their wedding celebration drifted on the evening breeze, Wade and Willa Anderson stood together on the land. They both now called home her journey from abandoned actress to beloved wife and partner complete. Their shared story just beginning. Years later, visitors to the Anderson Ranch would often comment on its unique character, the thriving cattle operation managed with progressive methods, the vibrant gardens surrounding the expanded homestead, the music room where community gatherings featured both classics and frontier ballads. Children from neighboring ranches came for the piano lessons Willa offered, while their parents attended reading circles discussing everything from Shakespeare to territorial politics. The Andersons' own children, first a son with Wade's steady nature and Willa's artistic sensibility, then twin girls who combined their father's practicality with their mother's flair for performance, grew up surrounded by both the hard work of ranch life and the beauty their parents cultivated so carefully. And on quiet evenings, long after the theatrical stages of her youth had faded to distant memory, Willa would sometimes think of that fateful day in Ordway when a stagecoach departed without her, and a kind-eyed rancher said, "My home is just down the road." The words that had seemed merely practical in that moment of desperation had proven profoundly prophetic, leading her not just to shelter, but to the place and the love she'd been seeking all along.